Hi friends, welcome to my channel. I'm AmandaMuse, and today we're going to be reacting to a video titled The History of Malaysia in 2 Minutes. I'm excited to learn a few things. If you're from Malaysia, you probably already know all of this, but I know that I have viewers from all over the world and we're going to learn something new together. So, in the comments as you're watching, if you learn something, please share because you know I'm going to comment on the things that I've learned. If you're new, I'm Amanda. I'm a mom of 2. I currently reside in Canada. However, I did live for many years in Malaysia and I became a mom there. That's where I had my babies. So Malaysia is just a very special place in my heart, and I love to reminisce about my time overseas and share some of my stories. So sometimes those are sprinkled into my videos, and I hope you enjoy this today. So if you'd like to, hit that subscribe button. I know I would appreciate it. And okay, let's jump into this video. Also, I can't really see, so I noticed my glasses were a little dirty, so here's hoping I got them cleanish, that'll do. All right, glasses on. Sorry about the glare and the reflection, but I gotta see, okay? Let's do this.
Malaysia has been a place of immigration, colonization.
Jesus. Sorry about that. Stand by, let's start again. Having technical difficulties. If you've been watching my reaction videos, you may notice I have a new computer. It's very exciting. So I'm still figuring out all the tips and tricks. I was working off a laptop for like the past 8.5 years, so this is a big deal. My neck is very grateful to not be staring down at the laptop. Okay, back to the video.
History of Malaysia is as interesting as the nation's geographical form. From BC times to modern day, Malaysia has been a place of immigration, colonization, wealth, nationalism, trade, and so much more. Positioned right above the equator in 2 land masses separated by a span of the South China Sea, and boasts a population of roughly 32.7 million. But where did it all begin?
So I will say, whenever I used to tell people where I lived, not everybody is great at geography, okay? So I would say, yeah, Malaysia, we're like on the equator. It's a great visual for people to see the Earth and then picture the equator and then where Malaysia kind of, fits in. So, good point.
While we do not know exactly how long ago human life came to the region, we do know that in the 1950s, a human skull was found in the Malaysian state of Sarawak that dates back to around 40,000 years ago. The next hypothesis of when civilization began in the area comes about 10,000 years ago, or 8,000 BC. There is debate as to who these people were or where they originally came from, but some anthropologists speculate that they may have traveled from China, initially to Indonesia, Sumatra, and then Borneo. Either way, these proto-Malays were eventually forced into more remote pockets of the locale as new migrating peoples believed to be the direct ancestors of the modern-day ethnic Malays came in and pushed them out to the north. A few hundred years BC, the influence of both China and India became apparent as trade began with the neighboring territories and the religions of Buddhism and Hinduism made their way into the Malaysia region. The local form of writing also took on a heavy influence from India, with Sanskrit being adopted as the new writing system. When the 7th century came around, the Srivijaya Empire from Sumatra took control of a large part of the contemporary Malay Peninsula, predominantly along the coasts. The ruling trade-based empire gained power and prosperity through their trade success with China and India, which was made easily accessible by their possession of the Malacca Strait, giving them easy access to the Indian Ocean from the South China Sea. The Srivijaya Empire's control remained steady until their supremacy peaked and started to decline in the 11th century. By the 13th century, they had lost all reign over the region and were replaced by a new type of monarchy, one run by Iskandar Shah. Prince Iskandar Shah, thought by some scholars to also be known as Parameswara, founded the port of Malacca, which became an integral piece of the Malay territory. By this point, trade between Malacca, the Chinese, Indians, and now Arabs continued to grow, and the Islamic faith spread through the realm. Experts are conflicted as to whether Iskandar Shah or Parameswara actually converted to Islam or not during this time. Either
Very interesting, hey, how it's all about trade, and that's really how, prosperous countries can become and how prosper happens. Because you notice it, I mean, obviously this is a strange comparison, but you notice it as cities disappear, right? Like, I find it fascinating. We have a train track that used to run, like the Trans-Canada across Canada. And what's happened over the years is they've taken parts of it out. I'm saying things I don't know that much about, but the point is that a lot of this railway was removed, and in its place is now a path that people can bike or walk. A lot of people make it a point to go across the Trans-Canada, like, it's not the Trans-Canada. Oh, I'm getting my names all muddled, but the point is as cities, as trains stopped going through cities, those cities became less and less important. So it's really interesting, hey, how trade and how being a hub makes all the difference. Always makes me think of places like Alaska, Anchorage, Alaska. Like when Dean used to fly, that was such a huge hub. There was always pilots there. There still is. Well, maybe not during this time, but it's a huge hub where people are going in and there's planes coming from all around the world. It's just very fascinating, hey?
Many people within the area began to convert, whilst the rulers throughout the Malaysian peninsula dominated trade across the sea between China and India, and Malay became the new official language. The 16th century brought about a new type of challenge for the existing powers of the region, as Malacca and its surroundings caught the attention of the Portuguese. Intrigued by the trading power's success and affluence, and led by Alfonso de Albuquerque, the Portuguese successfully captured Malacca in 1511. As Albuquerque told his men, Portugal wanted to seize Malacca because of the opportunities it allowed for Muslims to trade with other nations, which the Portuguese wanted to put an end to, claiming that they would be doing their lord's service. Although Albuquerque's expedition was victorious, the Malaccan Sultan managed to found a new kingdom known as Johor. As this new state grew, it also became an increasing threat to the Portuguese in Malacca. At first, Johor's attempts to retake Malacca were frustratingly ineffective. The Portuguese remained in control, and it was not until the Dutch began to show interest in Malacca.
What's really interesting about hearing when the Portuguese came, when the Dutch came, is that you see so much of their influence in the architecture, in just the way streets are named. It's just very fascinating to appreciate where places began and how they kind of changed and got and became different things as they went. And it's very interesting. And the names, Johor, like that's still a place.
Johor's luck changed for the better near the mid-17th century. In a battle that left many dead and followed two previous failed endeavors in 1606 and 1608, the Dutch East India Company, aligned with the Sultanate of Johor, were finally able to expel the Portuguese and capture Malacca for the Dutch. Per an earlier agreement made between the two powers, the Dutch took full authority over Malacca, but left the other Malayan sultanates alone. Johor went on to stand as a leading influence in the region until the assassination of its Sultan, Sultan Mahmud, in 1699. After that point, the command of contemporary Johor declined, eventually being overshadowed by a new people within its borders, the Bugis. At first, no significant issues arose until 1777, when a man by the name of Raja Kesil, supported by the Bugis, aimed to take the throne of Johor under the claim that he was the son of the murdered Sultan Mahmud. The presiding Sultan, Abdul Jalil, had taken the place of the late Sultan Mahmud, but was unable to maintain his reign in the face of this unforeseen challenge. Raja Kesil and his adherents took the capital city and chased Abdul Jalil out to the east coast of the peninsula. From his new settlement, Jalil established his own court, opposing Qasil's rule, and professed himself to once again be the true Sultan of Johor. In retaliation, Sultan Qasil directed the execution of his rival, and Abdul Jalil was subsequently murdered. Qasil's victory was not as sweet as he likely anticipated, though, because shortly after his adversary was assassinated, the Bugis people began to turn on the remaining sultan. In a complete reversal of favor, they astonishingly aided the son of Abdul Jalil and eventually placed him on the throne, deposing Raja Qasil and securing Bugis' dominance in Johor. During the same century as the unrest in Johor, the economic status of Malaya as a whole was also shifting. With growing trade participation from China, India, and Arab nations, the British were becoming progressively involved in the region as well. By the late 18th century, the Brits increased their involvement in the Malayan Peninsula through the British East India Company, going as far as to seize the state of Penang in 1786 and creating a capital, Georgetown, for their new possession.
There we go. So I lived in Penang for most of my time in Malaysia, and we lived just outside of Georgetown. So we were on, I mean, Penang's not a very big island by any means, but we lived in Tanjung Tokong, which is like on the other side. But you know, you go to Georgetown for everything, and that is for sure where you see the British influence, and there is quite a history of the British having been there, and it's you know, it's always the bad with the good, right? And I don't have that kind of experience, but it's really interesting to see how influential that is in just walking around town. It's kind of amazing.
Focused predominantly on building trade through the peninsula, Britain later seized Province Wellesley in 1800 and set up another trading post at the tip of the landmass in Singapore. Over the next couple of decades, the Dutch and the British both worked to maintain a hand in the affairs of the Malayan Peninsula, leading to the signing of the two Anglo-Dutch treaties in 1814 and 1824 that helped to split up the region's territories between both colonial powers. As part of the latter agreement, the Dutch handed Malacca over to the British. Following these developments, the population throughout Malacca, Province Wellesley, and other Anglo-Dutch controlled territories on the Malayan Peninsula began to skyrocket. Chinese and Indian immigrant workers flooded the region as other power struggles unfolded. In 1821, Siam, or modern-day Thailand, launched an incursion into the Malayan state of Kedah and overthrew its sultan. It took repeated uprising for the sultan to finally be restored to his throne as the Siamese dominion was reduced, leaving Kedah as only a vassal of Siam. Meanwhile, the Brits later took authority of Sarawak in 1841. In 1853, Britain ceased charging duty on all imports of tin, which, along with the Suez Canal opening in 1869, triggered a surge of Malayan exports of tin to Britain. Between those events, the trading post known today as Kuala Lumpur was founded in 1857. Over the next few decades, Britain increased and spread their control throughout the peninsula and outside of it. The region's economy prospered until the Great Depression of the 1930s, at which point exports rapidly decreased, and immigration into the Malayan territories had to be restricted in order to combat the level of unemployment. At the start of World War II, Japan invaded the Malayan Peninsula and overpowered the unprepared British troops and quickly occupied the region by the end of 1942. Tensions between the native Malays, Chinese, and Indians grew during the Japanese occupation, which lasted until 1945, when the British were able to recapture their Malayan possessions. By 1946, nationalist movements, such as the establishment of the United Malays National Organization, grew enough to prompt the founding of the Federation of Malaya, a unity of the formerly British-controlled Malayan states that would go on to gain their independence from the Brits in 1957. 6 years later, in 1963, the British colonies of Sarawak, Singapore, and North Borneo decided to join the Federation, forming the new nation of Malaysia. Though Singapore was originally a part of this coalition, it was pushed out in 1965 due to political disagreements with the Union. In 1969, the young nation faced a state of emergency when violent riots broke out in Kuala Lumpur after a strained election that spring. Celebrations by the winning party were met with counter-protests by the losing party, setting off deadly clashes between the opposing groups and prompting Parliament to be suspended. And Malaysia eventually adopted a new economic policy that allowed the nation's economy to flourish, eventually growing by a rate of 8% each year. Over time, Malaysia turned itself into a successful industrial country that is still prosperous today. And while it continues to grow and face ups and downs as every nation does, it remains independent, productive, and well-populated as of 2020.
It's so interesting to learn about, a country's history and how they got their start. I recently, I guess it was earlier this year, had learned about my own history, like where my family came from, and like just a little fun fact. So when, people from France came to Canada, they sent women at one point to help populate the country, which seems a bit... they were called les filles du roi, which were daughters of the king, and these women were probably very poor, likely orphaned. And one of those women that came over is actually one of my ancestors. So it's so interesting to think that I'm a descendant of one of the first women in Canada who came here by boat. Can you even imagine? So it's so interesting to learn about a country's start, and it makes sense, right? When you've lived in a place and you see hints of the Dutch culture, hints of the British influence, the Portuguese influence. It's fascinating. It's fascinating to have lived in a place and see all the influences of the Dutch, of the British, of the Portuguese, and to understand why and how it all took place. Fascinating. And you hear tons about the Strait of Malacca. Anyway, it's definitely, a piece of history I did not know about, so I'm going to tell you I learned a lot. I didn't realize, honestly, how the Portuguese took over in that way and how there was that fight, and it was all for the Strait of Malacca. And it makes sense because when you think about the success of a country, it has a lot to do with their ability to make money. So it being, the Strait of Malacca and how they were able to export, hugely important, right? So that was a pretty interesting way to learn something about Malaysia. I would love to know what you knew or didn't know. Leave comments below, and I'll catch you in my next video. Thank you so much for being here. Bye!